the strange power supply here. So let me just emphasize again on the current adjustment, the scale of it. So what I have here is the 2009 numbers. As the Department of Finance thought they would be in December 07, and as they think they're going to be now. So December 07 is, if you read the December 07 budget, and you read, well, here's the projection for 2009. In December 07, they thought taxes would be nearly 52 billion. Now they think even with tax increases, it's going to be 34. So that's a pretty big revenue loss to fight. In December 07, we thought capital spending this year would be 9 billion. It's now going to be 7. We thought current spending would be 53. Now it's going to be more, of course, because of all of the unemployment payments that we have to make. And the non-welfare spending has gone down. $1 billion of a cut is a lot of work to do, but in the grand scale of the deficit, it's not that much. So what we've seen is that, given the collapse in GDP, is government spending has rocketed as a share of GDP from 37 to 45. So a very big shift there, and so it has been a very big shock, and a lot of the adjustments so far, again, is large in scale. But of course, what I'm trying to emphasise is, in no way does this close the gap. And looking to the future, the plan is, major adjustment in 2010, more again in 2011, and then we have these unallocated corrections in 2012 and 2013, and I'll come back to that. But let me emphasise here that the absolute key budget here now is going to be the 2010 budget this December. Because first of all, whatever correction made in 2010 has spillover effects in 2011. I mean, whatever tax increases happen now, I presume will not be reversed in 2011. Whatever spending cuts are implemented in terms of programs will persist into 2011. So, and also if you think about the electoral cycle, the 2011 budget is going to be quite close to the next election. So 2010 is going to be the time to really make the defining adjustment. So in the framework document, the numbers that they're looking at is capital spend down relative to their expectations in autumn 08, 20% reduction in 2010, 33% in 2011. So big reduction in public capital. Now, of course, with lower tender prices, that this does not mean that the volume of public investment will go down by anywhere near as much. That's a big battle for the moment, to try and get most of that nominal cut via lower prices. In terms of current spending, if you take the version B is the non-welfare budget. So I'm assuming the welfare budget, I'm sure it's not going to be untouched, but let's assume it's reasonably untouched. Then the government is somehow going to save 5% on current spending in 2010 and 9% in 2011. So these are pretty big cuts, given the nature of current spending. And tax revenue is projected to grow by 5% in 2010 and 10% in 2011. So we have a lot to do. And that's even before we get to these unallocated adjustments in 2012 and 2013. And again, if you think about the long-term future of the economy, as Karl was mentioning earlier, the connection, say, between tax levels and potential output, there's a lot yet to be decided. So the government has, specified the distribution of the adjustment for the next couple of years, but it's unallocated for 2012-2013. So the top panel here assumes all of the unallocated adjustment will be via more taxes, and the bottom panel is via less spending. And so if you think about, the tax burden in the economy, the nature of the size of government spending relative to GDP, it looks very different under those two scenarios. Now, I'm sure it's going to be somewhere in between these two extremes. It's going to be some combination of both. All this is emphasising is, even beyond what they've specified, there's going to be a lot of decisions yet to be made. So here are some big issues in think about how it's going to play out. First of all, if you look at the cross-country evidence, typically there's a very big gap between the announced fiscal plan and what actually happens. So, the government, even in 2009, 2010, we see every day the political pressures to deviate from the announced plans. The cross-country evidence, in fact, is that the fiscal announcements actually don't have that much predictive power to actually what happens. So, all I'm emphasising here is it's a big challenge to implement what's already announced. And so, this is where the politicians here have a lot to do in terms of focusing on that. A second big issue is and also the data show that the gap between announcements and outcomes is bigger the more ambitious the plan. So in other words, if you have a really aggressive, very big adjustment to make, typically it's those kinds of programs that are most likely to fail. Because it's just the scale, it's just so big, it's very difficult to implement it. So the implementation issues here about achieving the announced targets are really big. A second issue is with tax burden. I mean, now more than ever, all that's been said throughout this afternoon about having an efficient tax system is really important. Taxing labour is going to be very adverse in terms of tackling unemployment. We have a smart economy plan for the future, for the long-term future. It's very difficult to have a high-skilled economy focusing on technologies which are essentially global in nature. High technology, green technology, where that workforce is going to be very mobile. Now the good news for us is everywhere is going to have more tax increases, so that there is more scope here. But at the same time, it's hard to talk about the viability of a smart economy plan if the level of taxes at the high end is unbounded as yet. And at the same time, in terms of the unskilled labour force, maximising participation means that the tax and welfare treatment of income levels closer towards the lower end also has to be such that there remains incentives to work. Now, there's a big issue right now, which is there's plenty of new spending initiatives being proposed. And again, from a macro point of view, that's not a problem. That the big emphasis here is that there has to be flexibility in the public sector such that a given envelope for total spending is consistent with reallocation. Now, it may well be the case that the right mix of public spending programs now in this deep recession is very different to the kinds of spending we had during the boom. That, as has been mentioned repeatedly, there may be programs that help to reduce the cost of unemployment, that keep people in jobs, that help to retraining and so on. So it should not be interpreted to say that a given spending total somehow rules out new spending programs. What it does say is those have to be financed by finding resources elsewhere in the total budget. So here we get some tough suggestions. And the number one tough suggestion is we're not done yet with public sector pay cuts. And what I'm emphasising here is that given, if we want to preserve public services, if we want to create resources for all of these new initiatives, the macroeconomic fact is that all of that will be facilitated by another round of pay cuts. And where they should happen is in the 2010 budget. Because it's not desirable to have this ongoing, dragging out situation where there's a fear that because they avoid it now, down the line there may be pay cuts. We don't want to delay pay cuts because that just creates this big overhang. It's very bad for morale in the public sector, and it's also not very good for consumer demand. If I believe that my pay is going to decline over the next number of years, obviously I'm going to save more than if I believe at the very least my pay will be flat or hopefully upward sloping. And so given the fact that more pay cuts can be helpful, this year's budget is the time to do it. And just bite that bullet and do it. It's the case that the public sector pay premium, it's not clear it's actually fallen even with the public sector pay levy. On a risk-adjusted basis, given the risk of unemployment in the private sector, given the fact in many occupations, not all occupations, but in many occupations, the evidence seems to be that pay is falling in the private sector. The pay premium, I think, I'm asserting that I